Students, welcome to MITS Unit 5 on commas. A comma indicates a pause. It can either separate something or it can connect two sentences if used with one of the fanboys. You have two sections that we will go over. One is when to use a comma and the other is when not to. You're expected to follow along as I explain each section on the left, and you are to follow the directions of inserting or deleting commas and the practice exercises on the right. So when to use a comma. 1. Use a comma after an opener, such as an introductory word, phrase, or clause. An opener is simply a single word or fragment that is located at the start of a sentence and is followed by a comma, such as this transition, furthermore, or this phrase, broken and unbruised, or the dependent clause, because she had a sore throat. So anytime one of these comes at the beginning of a sentence, it is always followed by a comma. Let's look at the practice. If you show up tomorrow, Joe will put you to work. If you show up tomorrow is a dependent clause at the beginning of a sentence. Therefore, you must insert a comma after tomorrow. Number 2, alert and ready to go, Janet hopped out of bed. Alert and ready to go is a phrase at the beginning of the sentence. Therefore, you must put a comma after it. Number 2, use a comma to set off an interrupter, a non-essential phrase or clause. So simply a word or phrase that interrupts the flow of the sentence. You can tell if something is an interrupter by checking to see whether or not it is essential to the sentence. If you can take it out and the meaning of the sentence doesn't really change, the interrupter is non-essential and should be set off with commas. A couple of examples are William, in fact, made the all-state hockey team. This is simply a transition phrase, and it is not essential to the meaning of the sentence. Therefore, it is surrounded by commas. Timmy, the smallest of the boys, was teasing my sister. Okay, this is a non-essential phrase because if we take it out, if we were to delete this, it does not change the meaning of the sentence, Timmy was teasing my sister. Let's look at your practice. My father, who works for the Road Commission, is an advocate for unions. Who works for the Road Commission is the non-essential relative clause. We need to put commas around it so that we know it is not essential to understanding that my father is an advocate for unions. Number 2, the Smiths are staying, I believe, in North Carolina. I believe is a non-essential phrase that we simply need to put commas around because it is not essential to understand the meaning of the sentence, the Smiths are staying in North Carolina. 3, use a comma to set off a closer, a fragment that is added after an independent clause and is preceded by a comma. We have 2 examples that are phrases. Joe dribbled up the court, comma, his sparkling new Nikes squeaking with each move he made. Remember, phrases simply offer that additional information. So in number 1 in the practice, we have Emma sat down on a bench, her legs aching from the long climb. We need to put the comma after bench because it separates the independent clause from the phrase. which are just describing Emma and what was happening with her legs and why she sat down on the bench. 4, we use commas to separate items in a series. You guys should know this. You've been doing this for a while. So getting to school on time, doing all my assignments, and behaving well are all things I can do to ensure my success in school. Okay. So when we look at the practice, we simply need to put commas after the items we are listing. Okay. He reached into his bag, comma. Pulled out his laptop, comma. Sat down, comma, and began to type. Okay. Number 5, use a comma plus one of the fanboys to make a compound sentence. You guys should be great at doing this by now. So an example would be, I'd love to help you finish your project, but I have to be to work by 9. Okay, just make sure that you identify that fanboy, okay, that is separating the two independent clauses, and make sure you have that comma in front of it. Okay. Number 6, use a comma to introduce a quotation when used with explanatory words like he said or she exclaimed, such as wait, comma, demanded Stevie, comma, you can't leave yet. Okay, so let's look at this practice exercise. Well, stammered Scott, I'll have to think it over. Okay, so just remember that you're going to need to put a comma inside the quotation marks when it comes before the explanatory words, stammered Scott, and you will need to also put them after the explanatory words to introduce the quote. 7, use a comma in dates and addresses. Okay, so on September 11th, comma, 2001, comma, there's a comma here because not only the date, but this is a prepositional phrase. Okay. The United States was attacked. We also have, with an address, I lived at 13768 Fruit Ridge Avenue, comma, Kent City, comma, Michigan, comma, for 13 years. Make note that each part of the address has a comma after it. So I graduated on June 7th, 1992. You will simply place the comma. I'm going to delete the 7th because I rarely actually use that. And I'm going to go ahead and place that comma right after that 7. Okay. When to not use a comma. And we do not use a comma if the dependent clause, which begins with an awibus, comes second, okay, after the independent clause. So the incorrect way to punctuate it would be, the boy knocked on the door while I was eating. Okay. So there's that comma, but that is incorrect. You simply say the boy knocked on the door while I was eating without the comma. So here, I won't help you, comma, if you don't want to learn. Remember, when a dependent clause comes second or comes after the independent clause, we do not use a comma, okay, and you will cross that out or remove that. Okay. Number 2, don't automatically use a comma just because you see one of the fanboys. Incorrect. We sat down at the table, comma, and began to talk. Remember, we do not need a comma when we have an independent clause that begins the sentence and then, on the second side, we just have a compound predicate. Okay, we would only use a comma if we had a subject on the right side of the sentence as well. So when we were looking at number 2, Jay went to the bathroom and washed his hands, we must remove this comma because we do not have a subject following the and. And the last one, 3, don't use a comma to set off an essential phrase or clause. Ask yourself this question. If you were able to take the phrase or clause out of the sentence, would the basic meaning of the sentence change? If the answer is yes, then the phrase or clause is essential. Okay, let's look at the incorrect example. I recognized many of the students who stood with me in front of the school. So if we took this out, it would simply say I recognize many of the students in front of the school, but we don't know exactly which ones this person is referring to. So we would need to remove the commas as it is essential to the sentence. Let's look at the last practice exercise. We have many of the people who attended the meeting were relatives of Autumn's. Okay. We must delete the commas. Delete the commas, not add anything. Okay. In order to make who attended the meeting essential to the sentence. Okay. Otherwise, we wouldn't know which specific many or people were relatives of Autumn's. Now you have your notes. I've gone over the practice exercise with you. Please go complete exercise 5.1 and submit it.